Now in Congress, we actually have criminals who are running congressional committees. The fellow that runs the tax committee, that has IRS oversight, he's been caught red-handed not paying his taxes for 10 years. He's been hiding income. He owns a luxury resort down in Punta Cana. It rents for $1,100 a night, and he's not been declaring this income. Now, this guy writes the tax code. John Conyers, this health care bill. The original health care bill that came out 2 months ago was 1,018 pages. Now, you wonder, how the heck could anything need to be that big? You know, the Old Testament of the Bible wasn't 1,000 pages. It wasn't even close. But in the 2 months since, now the bill has ballooned to over 2,000 pages. It just can't be good, solid thinking. But John Conyers, who's been in the Congress for 46 years, says, I don't have time to read it. You know, it'd take me 2 weeks and I have to have 2 lawyers to even understand what it says. What that says is, my time is worth more than the billions of dollars of your money that we're going to spend. That kind of attitude has just got to stop in Washington. So, every business that I know of, when they get a little bit over their skis, they trim back. And during a recession, you've got to cut costs. The only thing that never cuts costs, as you can see, is the federal government. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, not only is it getting bigger in terms of more and more employees, but there's a pay delta that's developed between private sector employees and public sector employees. The Boston Globe came out with an article just within the last month that said there's a $29,000 difference between what a federal employee is paid and what the private sector counterpart is being paid. But when you add in benefits, because a lot of them retire early and so on and so forth, it's actually a factor of 2. The average federal government employee is paid $120,000 a year with benefits. Private sector, $60,000 a year with benefits. So what this says is the private sector really is the engine that drives the economy. It's not the other way around. And this is one thing that I've learned for absolute sure in my life. But the private sector is paying wages to the government employees that it can't afford to pay to its own employees. And that just doesn't make sense. We've got to get that back in the line. Now, there's 2 points I want to make. I got to decide which one to make first. Let me start with, I want to give you a proof statement for why it is that the private sector drives wealth in America and not the government. The government can create jobs on a temporary basis, but it does not create wealth. And I'm going to tell you something that you won't have firsthand experience, but you can ask your parents, you can ask your grandparents. 49 years ago, in 1960, the United States of America had the 10 largest banks in the world. We had the 3 largest auto companies in the world. You can take any industry you can think of, whether it's steel, petroleum, consumer durables, aircraft, heavy machinery, anything you can think of. The largest companies in the world were American companies. And the government was actually quite small in 1960. It was the last year of Eisenhower's presidency. And the government spent $127 billion with a B, dollars that year, and had a $5 billion surplus. $127 billion. I'm going to write this number just so you can see the difference, because one of the problems with these numbers, million, billion, and trillion, is they sound so much alike. But you should think raisins, watermelons, and hot air balloons. That's really different. There's a 1,000-factor difference between each one of these. So a trillion is 12 zeros. And we're talking 3.2. So this fraction reduces to 127 over 3,200. It's about, what, 22 times or so bigger than it was in 1960. You could go weeks at a time without seeing the president on television back in 1960. Now, today, the government's such a dominant part of the economy. The first 5 or 10 minutes of every broadcast is what the president did today. But the United States had just completed the greatest wealth-building decade in the history of mankind. Not only had America really emerged into the American dynasty during the 50s, because of what happened in 1946, But at the same time, we were taking a lead role in rebuilding all of Europe after World War II, and all of Japan. We were building the federal highway system from scratch during those years, and creating a great deal of wealth. So, you know, the point here is that big government is actually toxic to the engines that are driving American wealth. And I'll give you a local example. Near where we live, down in Hollis, the 93-mile state line between Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Massachusetts has a 6.25% sales tax, and New Hampshire doesn't have a sales tax. And all along that border, businesses are just, on the New Hampshire side, are just clobbering their Massachusetts counterparts, particularly where they're selling commodities. There's a little shop near where we live that does $200,000 a week in tobacco products, and it's all Massachusetts license plate. Well, $200,000 a week is $10 million a year in cigarettes, and that's business that's lost to somebody on the Massachusetts side of the line. Now, right now, the government spent at $3.2 trillion is 25% of GNP. That's remarkable. You know, the whole gross national product is about a little over $14 trillion. This is almost 25%. So if 6.25% on the state line has that kind of an effect on business, imagine what the impact is for 25%. And as we've watched this government grow and grow and grow, we've watched the American industrial engines shrink. You know, by 1980, the entire Northeast was known as the Rust Belt, where there were factories in Pittsburgh and Erie, Pennsylvania, and Columbus, and Toledo, and Flint, Michigan, and Detroit. Most of those factories were gone. They were rusting. And that's how the area got the name Rust Belt. So we've got to retrace our steps. It's got to start at the top. We absolutely have to fight the corruption in Washington. You know, when the President of the United States sells a pardon for a contribution to his library, you shouldn't be surprised 10 years later if you find out that border guards on the Canadian border are selling access to the U.S. So, you know, leaders have to make it known. Here's what we stand for. Here's what we won't stand for. This is the taxpayers' money. It's not our money. The government doesn't create wealth. It's the industrial engines of America that create wealth. It's small business. What can we do to encourage small, and this is going to be an issue for all of you within the next few years. This has been a terrible time to graduate from college. You know, I'm sure you've read it, and maybe at Dartmouth it's a little easier than other places, but you know, you really need to see this economy take off. And one of the things that would be very, very helpful is to lower the capital gains rate on investments, because you know, a lot of business is just afraid to hire right now because the regulatory burden is so high and the tax burden is so high. So this is something that has to happen. And incidentally, what the government would lose in tax revenue, you'd more than make up in employee income taxes, and just the growth of the economy and all the other taxes that creates for America. But we've got to stimulate businesses that actually build things, put them in boxes, and export them overseas. And we have to get back to that. And the only way we can get back to that is to shrink the size of the government, because the government is not creating long-term wealth.